This house will be inherited by my son, right? May I use this room? You see, I am the actual heir to this house. I'm aware of that. But doesn't a husband's property include that of his wife? Therefore, effectively, this house belongs to my son. So it seems. Then it's settled. What do you mean by it's settled? I mean using this room as my own. Does that mean we are going to live together? Yes, I've decided. It's such a waste to have so many empty rooms in a big house like this. Now you won't have to take care of your husband alone. My mother-in-law, who came to my mother's funeral, suddenly declared she would live with us in our family home and smiled contentedly. My mother had just passed away, and I couldn't understand what she was saying. Didn't she realize my sorrow? I didn't need to hear jokes at such a time. This house was built by my respected father and was the home my beloved mother lived in. I didn't want my unreasonable mother-in-law to live here. My husband, who overlooked this, was also a problem. I decided to move out before the house could be tainted. I am a 42-year-old office worker who had given up on marriage after missing my chance and was still single at 40. However, through a friend's recommendation, I met Tony, my current husband, and we got married. I am older. Tony is 4 years younger. Tony always respected my opinions. He was a warm person. Where should we go for our honeymoon? I heard you want to go to Europe, Tony. But you said the Maldives would be nice. So let's decide on the Maldives, or like the following. Pa. My mom wants to live together. My dad's legs are not in good shape, and my mother can't support him alone. I understand your mother's hardship, but we decided not to live together before we got married, right? Right. Understood. I'll let her know, because he always prioritized my wishes. Sometimes I felt sorry. I was happy to have met such a wonderful person, but unfortunately, there was one regret. My father passed away 3 years before my marriage, so he couldn't see me married and be reassured. My father was a company executive and a strict man, but I respected his strictness. Although he was an executive, the company he worked for was a rather small and medium-sized enterprise. Yet, it brought in enough income to support our household, and our family home was sufficiently large to hold a funeral. After starting to work, I came to appreciate the harshness of a profession and respected my father even more. Then, 2 years after getting married, my mother also passed away. Mom too? Are you okay? You can rest outside for a bit? During my mother's funeral, my husband constantly considered my feelings. I was truly happy to be married to such a wonderful husband. Then Helen, my mother-in-law, came. I truly sympathize with your loss during these difficult times. Thank you. We weren't living with my mother-in-law, and we had little contact before, maintaining a distance. However, through my mother's funeral, my mother-in-law's true character became apparent. After the funeral, my mother-in-law approached me. It wasn't strange for her to come over, but she was smiling for some reason. Thank you for your help during the funeral. Everything went smoothly, and I am grateful. Now that the funeral is over, we can dispense with such formalities, right? For the first time, I thought my mother-in-law was showing kindness by telling me there was no need to put on a brave face. However, her true intentions soon became clear. Your family lives in such a lovely house. Wait a minute, please. My mother-in-law proceeded into the house without permission. Helen, please refrain from entering here. There are places that are still being tidied up. This house will be inherited by my son, right? May I use this room? You see, I am the actual heir to this house, I'm aware of that. But doesn't a husband's property include that of his wife? Therefore, effectively, this house belongs to my son. So it seems. Then it's settled. What do you mean by it's settled? I mean using this room as my own. Does that mean we are going to live together? Yes, I've decided. It's such a waste to have so many empty rooms in a big house like this. Now you won't have to take care of your husband alone. At my mother's funeral, my mother-in-law suddenly declared that she would live with us in our family home, smiling contentedly. My mother had just passed away, and I couldn't understand what she was saying. Didn't she realize my sorrow? I didn't need to hear jokes at such a time. This house was built by my respected father and was the home my beloved mother lived in. I didn't want my unreasonable mother-in-law to live here. Gradually, anger towards her began to well up inside me. Just after my mother's funeral had ended. It's no time for jokes. At that moment, my husband joined the conversation. "Mom, what are you saying? This isn't the place to have such a discussion. What's there to be so angry about? Enough. Please leave now." Tony finally made my mother-in-law leave the house. "I'm sorry. My mom was rude." "It's okay. You did well to scold her?" At that moment, I really felt that Tony was reliable. However, it later became clear that the real reason Tony was angry with my mother-in-law was slightly different from what I thought. 10 days after my mother's funeral, as my emotions and the chaos of the procedures had settled a bit, we had a discussion about the family home. During this time, Tony made an unexpected suggestion. "This apartment is small. Maybe we should move back to the family home soon. Yeah, we'll probably accumulate more stuff, and it would feel even smaller if we had children. The family home is better than this cramped apartment. Then, let's prepare to move. And, while we are moving, I have something to consult with you." "What is it?" "The family home is large and will have many empty rooms. And since my dad's legs are bad, I've been thinking about living together." "Wait, does that mean we are going to live together?" Tony was a kind person, but I recently realized that, although it seems like he always respected my opinion, he might just be agreeing with everything. Tony frequently brought up living together because his mother had asked him to convince me, and he always agreed to fulfill her wishes. Despite knowing that I refused to live together, he continued to propose it because he couldn't say no to his mother, clearly prioritizing her. We always said we would not live together with our parents, right? But my mom has asked several times to live together. At the funeral, you scolded her and showed opposition to living together, didn't you? True, I was angry that she went into the back of the house without permission, but I'm not completely opposed to living together. I just thought it wasn't the right moment to make such an important decision. This was the deciding factor. Tony just nods and passes on my opinion, but in reality it seems he was siding with his mother. Moreover, he said we should have a proper discussion, but he kept his distance and avoided a decisive stance. Perhaps he was doing this unconsciously, thinking he was staying neutral. This type of person believes in their neutrality and correct judgment, making them very difficult to deal with. Absolutely not. I've always been against living with someone who barged into the house on the day of the funeral and wanted to live in one of the rooms. Please tell that to your mother. What's bothering you so much? All right, I'll talk to her. I would prefer to avoid living with my in-laws as much as possible, but I was aware that living together might be a possibility depending on the situation when I got married. However, seeing my mother-in-law's behavior at the funeral, could I really live with her in the precious home that my father built and where my mother lived? Now that Tony's unreliability was becoming apparent, I couldn't consider choosing to live together. When Tony conveyed my opposition to living together to his mother, she directly called me to plead. "Why refuse to live together when you have such a big house? You married Tony and became part of our family. Why are you so opposed to living together?" "I have always declined to live together. I'm sorry. My husband's legs are bad, and it's hard for me to manage alone. Are you planning to abandon us? Didn't you hear about that reason from Tony? I'm sorry, but you're heartless. I won't ask you for anything anymore. I am aware of my father-in-law's condition, and it does weigh on my heart. However, based on my mother-in-law's past behavior, if we ended up living together, I could easily imagine a future where she pushes the responsibility of caring for my father-in-law onto me. Accepting to live together would require a change in attitude from both Tony and my mother-in-law. After being called heartless by my mother-in-law a few days ago, Tony suddenly started moving the living room sofa and table, making space. "What are you doing? Are you making space to store something?" "No, I'm making space to lay down 2 mattresses." The mention of 2 mattresses gave me a bad feeling. Hoping for the best, I asked Tony, "Are your father and mother coming to stay?" "No, officially it's before the move, but actually, we're starting today." This was really a terrible development. Despite my opposition to living together, Tony and his mother ignored it and forced their plan. She said she wouldn't ask me for anything, but is she actually asking through Tony? Why has it come to this? Actually, it's time to renew the lease on my parents' house, and we decided not to renew and move here instead. It's small for 4 people, but please bear with it until we move. That's not the point. Why are we talking about living together? I opposed living with someone who barged into the house on the day of the funeral and wanted to live in one of the rooms. Didn't I say that before? I'll tell my mom. Since we're going to live together, let's get along, okay? Why do you always prioritize your mother's opinion? I'm not just prioritizing her. I'm listening to both sides and making my own judgments. It seems that Tony easily agreed to his mother's proposal and went along with her plan to force the cohabitation. Perhaps he has been persuaded by his mother, but he might be under the illusion that he decided it himself. I thought Tony was a kind and good person, but when he teams up with his mother, he becomes more difficult to deal with than I thought. And so, the cohabitation with my in-laws was set into motion. Good of you to come. After all, this house is too small for 4 adults. Just bear with it until we move. Despite rolling in uninvited, I wish they wouldn't complain about the house. Sorry for suddenly increasing the number of old people by 2. I'll try to cause as little trouble as possible. No, I've heard about your disability, so please don't hesitate to mention if you need anything. I had heard that my father-in-law Michael's legs were bad, but it seems that he only struggled a bit when standing up, and it was not as severe as I thought. I was left wondering whether it was really so hard for my mother-in-law to take care of him. He strived to be polite and tended to take care of things by himself as much as possible. Unlike my mother-in-law, I felt that my father-in-law was not the type to cause trouble. Despite all this, is there a drugstore nearby? I forgot to bring some patches, and I'd like to go buy some. Michael, since your legs are bad, you should stay still. If something happens outside, it would burden Tony and the others. You can just have someone buy the patches for you. But I usually go shopping by myself. I told you to let me know if you needed anything. That's true indeed. I'm sorry to rush, but I really need them now. Could you go buy them immediately? Yes. All right. I didn't mind going to buy the patches, but why did my mother-in-law make decisions on her own? Also, my father-in-law may be polite on the surface, but he seems submissive to my mother-in-law's directions. Just like Tony, my father-in-law was a yes man to her. It's just shopping now, but if we continue living together, they'll gradually come to rely on me for everything. I couldn't stand the thought of these people living in the precious house my parents left behind. If they lived here, the house would get dirty. I had to do something to protect this house. While my in-laws were preparing to move into the family home, I decided to take some measures in advance. My mother-in-law was very pleased about moving to the new spacious home. "Hey, could I borrow the keys to the family home? I'd like to check the room we'll be living in first." "I have things to do, so I'll give the keys to Tony." "Then, Tony, could you drop them off? And could you stop by the storage unit on the way and measure the furniture for me?" "Understood. I'll take care of the keys." Since my mother-in-law was in a good mood, there were no major conflicts between us, and about 10 days passed without incident. During that time, I quietly proceeded with my preparations. "All right, the moving preparations are done. We'll soon start a new life in that house." As Tony and my in-laws finished their moving preparations, and my plan was also complete, I revealed a shocking fact to them. "Everyone, I have something to say." "What is it?" "You sound so formal. Are you planning some kind of moving celebration?" "No. The move to that house cannot happen." "What? Why not?" I presented a document. This document is an application for renunciation of inheritance. Renunciation of inheritance? What are you talking about? Even as a joke, that's awful. This is no joke. See the official signature from the court? That house is very important to me. I couldn't bear the thought of you living there. So I decided the best thing was to renounce it and keep it as a beautiful memory. Why would you do something so reckless? If you were going to give it up, you could have sold it and turned it into cash. Why would you throw away something so valuable? Selling the house and getting the money would just mean relying on that money, right? I thought it would be cleaner if it didn't exist at all. We moved out of our previous home to move into the new one. What are we supposed to do now that you've done this? I have always opposed living together. Despite that, you forced the issue without proper discussion. So I decided to take drastic measures. When Tony and my mother-in-law learned that the house would not be theirs due to my renunciation, they were too shaken to speak. My father-in-law looked at their reactions and was at a loss. But I was not done attacking. "And Tony, I'm considering divorce. What do you think?" "What? Divorce, Tony. You should divorce such an irresponsible wife immediately." I had anticipated that my mother-in-law would demand a divorce swiftly. I brought up the divorce proposal to see if Tony could make a decision on his own in this situation. If Tony consulted his mother at this point, it would be impossible for us to continue living together. I'm confused being asked about divorce so suddenly. What should I do, Mom? Tony had not yet made a decision, but my resolve for divorce was firm. You have no choice but to divorce immediately. There's no other way, Tony. It can't be helped. Mom says so too. I see. Since you also want to divorce, that must be the best option. The pattern was clear. Both Tony and my father-in-law always followed my mother-in-law's wishes. Moreover, Tony acted as though he was making compromises for me. Let's proceed with the divorce then. I will pack my things and leave today. With only the essentials, I stayed at a hotel that night. The next day, I took a half-day off to take care of important matters and headed to the court. A few days later, my mother-in-law called. "What are you thinking? How come that house is yours now?" "What are you talking about suddenly?" "Ah, you researched the property division?" "Yes, I own that house." "You falsified documents to deceive me." "It's impossible to falsify documents submitted to a court. What I showed you was authentic. But why do you own the house that you were supposed to have renounced?" "Well, I withdrew the renunciation application." It's challenging to withdraw a renunciation once declared, but it takes time for such a statement to be formally accepted. Within that period, it's always possible to withdraw. What I showed my mother-in-law was not an accepted document, but one that was still in the application stage. I pretended to renounce the house and hinted at divorce to gauge Tony and my mother-in-law's reactions and decide my next steps. I didn't expect much from my mother-in-law, but I had hoped Tony would say he didn't want a divorce on his own. If Tony had refused the divorce, I would have reconsidered the idea and explained the truth about the house later. "So the house really is yours now?" "Then, since it was acquired before the divorce, it's subject to property division, right? In this case, we'd split the sales profits, wouldn't we?" My mother-in-law was trying to get as much as possible from me, but I've already considered this point. If we had purchased that house, it would be considered marital property. However, as it was inherited, it remains my separate property, and unfortunately, separate property isn't included in the division of assets. Didn't you consult a lawyer when you found out the house was mine? While mortgage payments or renovation expenses might make it a part of the divisible assets, that isn't the case here, is it? How much of the asset division will Tony receive? Since we haven't been married long, there's hardly anything. At most, it might be the car, but that still has a loan on it. All this just to get your hands on the inheritance alone. How cruel. I want to protect that house because it is the home my parents loved. I don't want people like you living there. If you have anything else to say, let's communicate through lawyers from now on. After that, I firmly communicated my intentions and future plans to my mother-in-law and resolutely ended the call. The moment I hung up, I felt a sense of liberation, but more than that, I reaffirmed my strong resolve. Following that call with my mother-in-law, the divorce proceedings became markedly smoother and more rapid. It was clear that she was pressing Tony to hurry the divorce, and her influence was still significant. Once the divorce was officially finalized, I was finally free from being manipulated by my in-laws. Genuinely feeling relieved at this fact, I also felt a sense of accomplishment for having managed to protect my father's house. Keeping that house held significant meaning for me, and my heart was filled with a sense of refreshment. After I moved out, my former in-laws stayed in the apartment we once shared for a while. Given its limited size, the living space must have remained quite restricted even after I left. My former mother-in-law seemed to be actively looking for a new place to live, but considering their age, it was difficult to find a suitable property, and passing real estate screenings was a challenge. Eventually, my ex-husband decided to rent a relatively small house, and there they began a new life together with his parents. The rent for that house was undoubtedly higher than the previous apartment, and a new responsibility of caring for his parents had arisen for him. He undoubtedly faced many challenges ahead. My mother-in-law had once eagerly anticipated moving into the spacious house left by my late father. However, reality was far from her expectations, and she must have been greatly disappointed to settle for a much smaller residence. As for myself, I have started a new life in the house my parents left me. The house feels as if it still retains the warmth of my parents, always warm and filled with affection. Living here marks the beginning of a new chapter, providing me with great comfort.
I was speechless with shock upon my husband's sudden revelation that he had demolished the house I grew up in. I had only just inherited the house and land following my father's death. My husband had always wanted to demolish my family home to build a duplex house in its place, and it seems he finally managed to do so by force. I was devastated and angrily cried over the destruction of my childhood home filled with precious family memories, but Joe just mocked me, saying, "It was hard to demolish it myself, but I'm satisfied with having cleared the land in the end." My name is Sarah. I am 27 years old, living with my husband Joe, who is 3 years older than me, and we do not have any children yet. Before we got married, I lived with my father in our family home while working. My mother passed away when I was in high school, and since then, it has been just my father and me supporting each other. I had planned to start working immediately after graduating from high school and managed to find employment at a local company as planned, where I am still working today. I find my job fulfilling, and the atmosphere at my workplace is positive. Although Joe can sometimes be unreliable, his kindness since our dating days and his willingness to help with household chores have made me satisfied with our life as a couple. However, the only problem I am facing is not getting along well with Joe's parents. At the beginning of our marriage, I hoped to become close with them as they would become my new family. But they didn't seem to welcome me warmly, always showing a cold attitude, and our relationship worsened rather than improved. Gradually, I became exhausted from trying to maintain a relationship with his parents and now try to keep my interactions with them as peaceful and minimal as possible. Thankfully, we didn't live with them nor see them often, which has been a relief. If we had lived together, it might have been stressful enough to affect my health. Moreover, having my father in the same city was a strong support for me. Despite my worries about the relationship with Joe's parents, I believed we had managed to avoid major troubles so far and hoped we could continue to have a peaceful married life. However, recently, my father passed away suddenly from an acute myocardial infarction, leaving me to lose my emotional support forever. The grief of suddenly losing my father was deep, and I found myself visiting the family home often after the funeral, crying alone. Yet, considering my job and life with Joe, I knew I couldn't mourn forever. It was only recently that I began to come to terms with my feelings. After my father's death, the now uninhabited family home and its land fell to me to inherit. My mother had already passed away, and since I have no siblings, my father's estate naturally passed to me. After completing the inheritance procedures for the land, Joe and I started discussing the future of our home. My father had told me before he passed, "Sarah, after I'm gone, you can use this house and land however you wish." Therefore, the future of the now vacant family home was up to me to decide. That house was a precious place where our family had spent time together, filled with countless memories. For this reason, I had no intention of selling the land or demolishing the house at this time. Although it would incur property taxes, I wanted to maintain the status quo for the time being, occasionally cleaning the house and reminiscing about the time spent with my family in front of my parents' photographs. However, Joe had a different opinion. He was pleased as if the inheritance was his own, saying, "It's a waste to leave it as it is. You've acquired good land, so you should make effective use of it as soon as possible." Joe was eager to use the land where my family home stood, and our views were completely at odds. Indeed, the family home was conveniently located within a proper distance from the station, surrounded by facilities like shopping centers, making it geographically attractive. The house, built before I was born, also showed its age and some parts were deteriorating. However, one of the options I considered for the future was to renovate this house if we had children. So, I just couldn't accept Joe's proposal. The reason was his attitude of treating my family home as if it were his own property and pushing things forward forcefully. Additionally, my in-laws shared the same stance upon hearing about the house. Discussions had been had multiple times as if the entire in-law family would eventually move to that land, making me, the heir, feel left out. Seeing Joe and my in-laws getting overly excited made me fear that the house would be handled carelessly if things continued this way. Therefore, I emphasized to Joe time and again, "Listen, that house and land are mine, not yours or your parents'. So, please don't proceed with any plans on your own." However, Joe just casually responded to my concerns with, "It's okay, Sarah, you worry too much." He never truly listened to what I had to say. I thought he was a kind person despite his unreliability, but his attitude changed the moment I inherited my father's estate, hardly taking my words into consideration during our discussions. As a result, I began to harbor doubts about Joe, and my distrust grew stronger day by day. On a certain holiday, Joe said he was going to his parents' house and left early in the morning. I was caught up with household chores that had been neglected during the weekdays. However, less than an hour after he left, Joe returned with his parents in tow, and I had to abruptly stop my chores to welcome them. While they might be ideal parents for Joe, interacting with my in-laws was still challenging for me, given the issues with my family home. Father or mother, what brings you here today?" I asked, filled with anxiety since there had never been a visit from them without prior explanation from Joe. "We thought it's about time to make a decision about the future of your family home. That's why I called Mom and Dad over," Joe replied with a smile, confirming my worst fears and making my heart heavy. "What do you mean by make a decision?" "I've always told you that I wish to keep things as they are," I stated clearly, only for Joe to immediately counter, "I've told you it's a waste. That's why I want to demolish your house and build a new duplex house there so we can live with Mom and Dad." "What?" I couldn't hide my shock at his sudden proposal, but quickly voiced my opposition. "What are you talking about? I absolutely cannot agree with that. I've told you before not to proceed with any plans without my consent." No matter how much I resisted, Joe and his parents just looked at me with surprise. Then the father-in-law, with a sigh of exasperation, said, "Leaving such a wonderful piece of land unused is a waste. You should seriously consider what Joe is saying. A wife should obey her husband." I didn't have the courage to point out that Joe had never seriously considered my opinions. His parents loved him deeply, and it was natural for them to side with their son. Their unconditional support for him was a testament to their deep affection. Moreover, the father-in-law in particular held on to outdated values, believing firmly that a woman should obey a man. In his view, the hierarchy within the family was clear and the wife was expected to follow her husband's instructions. Thus, if I expressed opposition to Joe's proposals or demands, I was inevitably faced with harsh reprimands. To him, how a daughter-in-law could speak in such a manner was unthinkable. My mother-in-law, choosing her words more carefully, said, "Sarah, we're getting older and we might need care in the future. Considering our future lives, living under the same roof as Joe and you would be ideal. That way, we can have peace of mind knowing you're close by." However, behind her calm expression, I sensed an expectation for me to take on the household chores and daily tasks that come with living together. At that moment, with her husband present, she maintained her facade, smiling gracefully as she played the role of the ideal wife. But I knew from experience that whenever he was not around, her attitude towards me would change dramatically, becoming sarcastic, and the kindness she showed then would disappear. When alone with my mother-in-law during visits to their home, she would often make unnecessary comments like, "Haven't you had children yet?" Or, "I want to see my grandchildren soon," and try to dump household chores on me, citing her age as a reason for being unable to move around easily. If I ever refused, she would persistently criticize me, saying, "Respecting your elders is the most basic principle. Can't you even follow that simple rule? What kind of environment did you grow up in?" Because of the constant unpleasant behavior from my in-laws, the thought of living under the same roof with them was unbearable. That house is a place filled with precious memories of living with my parents for many years. So, I have no intention of demolishing it. Please leave it as it is for now. I repeatedly pleaded, with no intention of changing my mind. Yet, Joe and his parents showed no signs of giving up easily. Such a stubborn daughter-in-law. Considering the future, we should build a duplex house to live together. Your parents are no longer in this world, so you should dedicate yourself to us now, my mother-in-law said, dismissively regarding my parents with her words. I managed to compose my expression despite almost frowning at that statement. Ultimately, that day ended with both parties merely asserting their opinions, leading to no substantial dialogue, and my in-laws left somewhat disgruntled. From then on, Joe and I continued to have disagreements about my family home and its land. The current house is too small, and considering the possibility of having children in the future, wouldn't it be better to build a bigger house? Joe consistently insisted on building a duplex house, refusing to budge from his position. Behind his argument, it was clear that he was using the prospect of children as an excuse, when in reality, he wanted to live comfortably in a spacious house with his parents. While I could understand the desire to live with one's biological parents from a future perspective, I never gave a positive response to it. I was convinced that living together with my in-laws would inevitably lead to more troubles. Therefore, aside from the demolition of my family home, I strongly opposed the duplex house idea every time it came up. As a result, Joe would always become irritable. Over time, our marital relationship gradually deteriorated, pausing without any meaningful discussions. Even amidst such circumstances, I made time to visit my childhood home, cleaning and spending time in memory of my parents. However, as work became busier, I couldn't visit it for about a month. Consequently, I decided to move my parents' portraits to our current residence. I hadn't mentioned moving the portraits to Joe. Recently, our conversations had quickly turned into arguments, so I decided to keep this matter to myself. However, this decision would later prove to be the right move for me. After a busy period at work ended, I was looking forward to relaxing the following weekend. I was expecting a peaceful break, but that morning, my in-laws appeared at our house without any notice. It had been a while since we last saw each other, the previous occasion being when we argued about my family home. This visit was also unexpected, with no prior notice from Joe or his parents. Strangely, my parents-in-law were in a very good mood, looking at me happily alongside Joe. "Today, we have something important to tell you, Sarah," said my mother-in-law with a smile. I had a feeling that this news wouldn't be good for me. "What is it?" I asked. Joe stood in front of me and calmly announced, "I've already demolished your family home." I was speechless with shock at that moment. The statement seemed like a bad joke, but seeing Joe and my in-laws smiling smugly forced me to accept the harsh reality. "Why would you do such a thing?" I demanded, but Joe continued to laugh off my question with a calm demeanor, as if mocking me. Astonishingly, Joe had demolished my family home without my knowledge or permission during the month when I was too busy with work to visit. It seemed he had taken advantage of my absence. It was tough to do it myself, but in the end, I'm satisfied with having cleared the land, Joe said, pretending to be tired. He had spared the expense of hiring a professional demolition company, borrowing heavy machinery from his father, who runs a small factory and owns several pieces of heavy equipment. His father, willing to fulfill his son's wish, had provided the machinery without hesitation and helped clear the land. How could you do something like this without permission? I've said no many times. I cried out, tears mixing with my anger. My childhood home was filled with irreplaceable memories, including my parents' mementos and family photos from my childhood. The only thing unharmed was my parents' portraits that I had brought home. The reality that everything else was removed along with the rubble was like a nightmare. How could you do something so terrible? I will never forgive you. I had reached my breaking point. I declared this with a firm gaze towards Joe and his parents, but they remained unfazed, as if convinced of their superiority. You couldn't make a decision, so I took the step forward. We can't wait forever for you to decide. Joe arrogantly justified his actions as if they were entirely rightful. Then he added with a loud laugh, "That's why I took over your family's land." Hearing Joe speak so proudly as if he were the rightful owner of the land, my anger turned to disappointment. I could feel my love for Joe rapidly fading. It seemed neither Joe nor his parents understood the gravity of their actions, and I let out a heavy sigh. "What are you talking about? When did I ever transfer that land to you? Since no formal procedures have been completed, that land is still mine." Joe appeared not to fully grasp the significance of my words, wearing a puzzled look, and his parents had similarly confused expressions. I had no memory of transferring those rights to Joe, as no formal registration of the property transfer had been completed. Thus, demolishing someone else's property without permission constitutes a legal violation. You might not know since you didn't go through a professional agency, but what you did can be legally penalized, I declared. At these words, Joe's complexion changed. If he had commissioned the demolition work to a legitimate company, this situation would never have arisen. I intended to show no leniency towards my husband Joe on this matter and continued. "Even if we are married, demolishing someone else's property without permission, especially using your father's company's machinery, is against the law. I intend to take legal action on this matter," I emphasized. I had researched property law previously in case of any issues with the land I inherited from my father, never imagining Joe would go this far. Mentioning the use of the machinery, the usually calm father-in-law raised his voice in response. "Wait a minute. In a marriage, a wife's property belongs to the husband, doesn't it? So, the logic that demolishing that house constitutes a crime doesn't hold up. I'll repeat, I am the rightful owner of that house, not Joe. I neither agreed to its demolition nor was I informed about such plans. What he did is clearly illegal, and I will be reporting this to the police. I cannot just stand by silently after you destroyed my cherished home without permission." My calm response left my father-in-law speechless. It seemed he had underestimated the seriousness of the issue. Even if he lent the company's machinery for Joe to demolish the house, he hadn't expected me to take legal action against Joe, thinking that clearing the land would somehow make everything all right. Reporting Joe to the police. "You are his wife. Thinking about such a terrible thing seriously is problematic, isn't it?" My mother-in-law exclaimed in panic, replacing my silent father-in-law. "The real problem is you demolishing someone's house without permission. This isn't the kind of issue that can be resolved by hiding behind our marital status," I countered calmly. Then I pulled out my smartphone and showed Joe the screen where I had searched for legal information. The screen displayed details about the crime Joe had committed. "Your actions constitute criminal damage to property. This means a prison sentence without a fine, and you will be going to jail." Going to jail. His father panicked, and his mother let out a small scream. "Wait, please, think it over. We're married," Joe said, turning pale and clinging to me. However, I firmly pushed him away, saying, "Don't use the fact that we're married as an excuse. Because of you, my childhood home no longer exists. You destroyed all its memories. I'll be contacting the police now," I stated clearly, deciding to report to the police on the spot. At that moment, Joe seemed to finally understand the seriousness of his actions. "I'm going to be arrested." "No way," he muttered in a trembling voice, collapsing in despair in front of me. Later, Joe was arrested, and I moved out of the house we shared to find a new place near where my family home once stood. Although I initially thought about divorce immediately, Joe refused, leading to prolonged negotiations through legal professionals. Thus, I considered a mediated divorce through family court. In the meantime, I hired lawyers and a private investigator to gather information on Joe's actions and background. The collected information revealed that Joe had frequently visited nightlife districts for years and had multiple loans hidden from me. It appeared he had been anticipating inheriting my estate from my father to settle his debts using my assets. Hearing this truth left me speechless. Furthermore, Joe had discussed this debt issue with his parents, and unbelievably, they had become guarantors out of love for their son. After Joe's arrest, the repayment of the debt began to falter, and my in-laws were chased to fill the gap. Out of the blue, I received a desperate call from my mother-in-law. "Sarah, please help," she pleaded over the phone. When I asked why, she directly sought financial assistance. The pressure to repay Joe's debts had increased, and they were struggling to make ends meet. "Sarah, you have the inheritance left by your father, right? Could you possibly share some of that money with us?" was her audacious request. I couldn't bring myself to seriously consider such an unreasonable request and coldly refused, saying that's impossible. "Please resolve this issue yourselves before ending the call." Anticipating further calls, I decided to block my in-laws' number at that moment. I haven't shared my current apartment address with them and don't expect them to visit directly. I no longer wish to have any association with Joe or my in-laws. Receiving the call from her only intensified my desire to sever ties with Joe swiftly, leading me to file for a mediated divorce. As a result, the mediation was successful, and we were officially divorced. Later, I learned that my in-laws had to sell their home and the factory managed by the father-in-law, using the proceeds to pay off the debt. They have since moved to a small apartment in the countryside and are living a modest life. Years have passed, and although Joe was released from prison after serving his sentence, his criminal record has hindered his job search. It seems he has resorted to committing petty crimes like shoplifting and was arrested again. Hearing this, I felt nothing but disdain. I harbored no sympathy for him. After separating from Joe, I utilized the land that he had cleared to secure a steady income, leading a peaceful life. Thanks to the inheritance from my father, I won't face financial difficulties living on my own in the future. Nonetheless, I plan to continue working. Now that I no longer have any ties to Joe or his parents, I can devote even more to my work without any worries. I'm not considering remarriage at the moment, so I plan to focus on my career and enjoy my independent life for a while.
Today is the day we divorce. Get out of this house, immediately. When my husband returned home for the first time in 2 months from a business trip, he declared this as soon as he opened the door. I never expected him to come back with his lover. While I was too shocked to say anything, his lover boldly sat down on the sofa. My husband gestured toward the entrance with his chin, as if to hurry me out of the house. Both he and his lover seemed eager to get rid of me, the nuisance, but I wouldn't allow it. Regaining my composure, I responded firmly. "What? But this is my house, isn't it?" "What?" They seemed happy, dreaming of a luxurious life they couldn't attain, unaware that their end would be hellish. "My name is Olivia Robinson. When I graduated from university and started working at a corporation, I fell in love with a senior colleague named Eric. He was caring and mentored me when I was new, and I was drawn to his mature charm. Eric seemed to like me too, and confessed his feelings 6 months after we met. We soon started dating, and our relationship progressed smoothly. However, many found him attractive. I realized this 2 years into my job when a new employee named Carrie Cooper joined. Eric became her trainer, and their closeness during training seemed unusually intimate. Carrie was charming and petite, a type that men tend to like, and Eric didn't seem to mind. Driven by jealousy, I felt pained seeing their relationship appear so close. During that time, I was surprised when Eric suddenly proposed to me. Feeling that I was about to be abandoned, the proposal moved me profoundly. Naturally, I accepted his proposal, and we successfully got married. At 26, I started my life with the man I loved. However, it was not the beginning of happiness. Contrary to the glamorous newlywed life I had anticipated, I faced a stark reality. The first shock after getting married was meeting my husband's family for the first time. I was nervous about what kind of people they would be, but I exclaimed in surprise the moment I met them. "What? Why is the president here?" Turns out, Eric's father was the president of our company. It seemed to be a secret within the company that Eric was the president's son. I didn't know this fact either and was truly surprised at the time. I'm sorry for keeping it quiet. However, I want to take over the company on my own merits, without relying on my parents' influence. That's why I kept it hidden. Really? Are you really okay with marrying me then? Olivia, it's because it's you. Trust me more. Though I was bewildered by the sudden revelation, Eric's words were reassuring. President Colin, unlike his strict professional demeanor, was very warm and made me feel comfortable. My son will become busier from now on. During such times, having someone warm like Olivia around will help him perform better. I'm counting on you. As I acknowledged Eric's greatness once more, I nodded vigorously. What surprised me most was the immense financial power of my in-laws. Mr. Cullen even provided a residence for us. I was simply astonished by the difference in our living environment. My father is wonderful. I'll strive to become a great president like him. Inspired by Eric's positive attitude, I decided to give my all as his wife. Ultimately, through discussions with Eric, I decided to quit my job and dedicate myself to our home. In fact, I wanted to continue working for a while longer, but Eric emphasized the importance of household responsibilities and expressed his wish for support so he could concentrate on his work, to which I agreed. It's a bit disappointing to leave my job, but since Eric is working hard, I can't complain. As expected, after I quit my job, Eric's return home became noticeably later. He seemed to be handling much more work than before. It was not uncommon for him to spend nights at the office. Despite being married for only 2 months, I hardly had any time with my husband. I felt lonelier in our home together than I did when I was single. I understand you're busy, but I wish you would pay a bit more attention to our home life. I often subtly expressed my loneliness, but my words never seemed to reach Eric. He was passionate about his work and focused on honing his skills. There will come a time when we have children, and I won't be able to dedicate myself to work like this. It might be hard on you now, but this is the time I need to work hard. If it was for the sake of our future life together, I had no choice but to endure. However, as time passed, the situation gradually began to change. When Eric came home late at night, he showed no interest in whether I was awake or not. "Welcome home. Should I warm up the food?" "Let's eat. You must be hungry. I made your favorite dish." "Ah, I grabbed something at the deli on my way home. I'm too tired, so I'm going to sleep now." Eric didn't make eye contact and went straight to bed. In the morning, he slept until the last minute, rushed out of the house without looking at the breakfast I had prepared. Clearing away the uneaten breakfast had become a part of my daily routine. With each morning of disposing of the untouched food, the sense of emptiness grew. I'm lonely. Before we were married, we had more time and could talk more. Now, There was no meaningful conversation at home. I felt like a machine, mechanically carrying out household chores every day. Occasionally, Eric would spend a Sunday at home. That day, by chance, we had a day off together and ate breakfast together for the first time in a long while. It's rare for us to have a day off like this. Why don't we go out? I found a cafe you might like. I'd rather relax at home on my day off. Think about it a little. No matter how cheerfully I spoke to him, Eric responded indifferently. Even after Eric finished his breakfast, he quickly moved to the living room. Still, it was better than the days when meals remained untouched. While I was hurrying to finish eating, the intercom rang early in the morning. Who could it be this early? It's only 8 a.m. As I wondered suspiciously, Eric, who had been sluggish until then, quickly stood up and rushed to the entrance. I thought perhaps something we ordered had arrived, but when I saw who my husband had let in, my mouth dropped open in surprise. Wow, Eric's house is really wonderful. Oh, Olivia, long time no see. Have you aged a bit? Are you tired? It was Carrie, a junior from work, and her student-like manner of speaking caught my attention. Why are you here? I came to celebrate Eric's marriage. I always wanted to do something for him, since he's helped me so much. I knew you were coming today, but I didn't expect you this early in the morning. Eric, now seemingly a different person, laughed brightly, and I felt a bit irritated inside. If he knew she was coming, why hadn't he told me? What did that smile mean? Even if she was a junior, it wasn't pleasant to see my husband laughing with another woman. I managed to force a smile and prepared some tea. You really didn't need to go through all this trouble. Oh no, I just wanted to see Eric. By the way, your stomach looks a bit bigger. Are you expecting a child? Carrie's smirk made the question sting. I wanted children, but how could we have any with no time as a couple? It's just that I've gained a bit of weight. Kids are still a bit off in the future, I guess. Him? I can't imagine Eric being happy about that belly. But maybe you could lose a little weight if you tried hard enough. Carrie's words clearly contained malice. As I was about to address her insensitivity, she placed a large paper bag she had brought on the table. Actually, I brought a gift today. Please accept this. As I hesitated, Eric quickly pulled something out of the paper bag. A tie? It's dark blue with some subtle embroidery. Quite stylish. I chose this item because it suits you perfectly, Eric. I know your tastes exactly. Carrie really understands me well. As a senior, it's a joy to have such a cute junior. Eric smiled contentedly. Even if she was a junior, wasn't their relationship too close? Considering the time of her visit, it was inappropriate, and Carrie's hidden hostility was a major stress for me. As I listened half-heartedly, while feeling irritated, Eric tapped my shoulder and said, I'll drop Carrie off, so I'm going out for a bit. What? You didn't want to go out when I suggested it earlier. If you're going, I'm going too. Don't be silly. Who will do the housework if you go out? He laughed, pointing at the dishes, as if housework was solely my job. Angry and disappointed, I watched as Eric happily left the house with Carrie. What does this mean? Am I just some kind of housekeeper? My irritation showed no signs of settling. As I flipped the neglected calendar, I noticed summer was approaching. Next month would be my birthday. Would Eric remember it? I had believed he would handle such an occasion properly, but Eric had easily betrayed that expectation. This all happened within a week of Carrie's visit. By the way, I have a business trip out of the prefecture starting next week. I'm counting on you to take care of things at home as usual. Another sudden announcement. How long will it be this time? 2 months. It's long, but it's necessary for work. Eric frowned slightly in irritation, seeming displeased with my reaction. I'm the next president, after all. Work like this is always there. I can't deal with that kind of look. Sorry, but next month is. I trailed off, my words becoming muddled. Talking about my birthday seemed pointless. After all, work came first, so my wishes stood no chance. Afterwards, I said nothing. After Eric left for his solo assignment, I sent him emails during the day and night, times I thought he might be free. I assumed he would respond to simple messages, but replies came perhaps once a week, if at all. Most messages were marked as read, and that was the end. At most, I would get a single sticker in return. This was the same on my birthday. While my family and friends celebrated with calls and bright messages, my husband Eric said nothing. Even my father-in-law Colin made the effort to visit, but Eric didn't say a word. I finally had to tell him myself that it was my birthday. The only response was a sticker saying okay. A wave of loneliness washed over me. What am I to Eric? I'm trying hard as a wife, but maybe it's all a misunderstanding. Feeling unable to bear these emotions alone any longer, I decided to have a serious talk about our future when Eric returned. And on the day Eric came back, I waited for him in the living room. Then, I saw him enter the house with another woman. It was Carrie. What is this? You just got back and you're doing this. Shocked, I confronted Eric and Carrie, but they boldly stated while laughing, "Today is the day we divorce. Get out of this house immediately." What do you mean, divorce? My heart was in turmoil over this unexpected turn of events. That's when Eric's mother Sharon appeared. I'm sorry, but Eric told me he deeply loves Carrie, and I can't abandon my son, she began. I had suspicions about Carrie and Eric before, but I never expected them to act so blatantly. As I watched, speechless, the lover boldly sat down on the sofa. Eric pointed toward the entrance, suggesting I leave immediately. Now that I've returned from my solo assignment and nearly finished my work as the successor, I don't need a housekeeper anymore. I've decided to start a new life with the honest and beautiful Carrie. She's honest? You really have no eye for women. Don't blame the young and attractive Carrie. She is the one I truly love. Say no more. Eric criticized me as if I were the problem. A truly sincere person would never commit such betrayal. They laughed triumphantly, and facing the reality I had ignored, I reached my breaking point. I had wanted to find a resolution through discussion. However, if challenged this way, I saw no reason to hold back. I regained my composure and responded, "What? But this is my house, isn't it? What?" They still seemed to be mistakenly rejoicing, thinking they had the upper hand. They are greatly mistaken if they think they can be at ease forever. This house is yours? Stop joking. This house was given to me by my father. I intend to change the ownership to my name soon. It's certainly not yours, Olivia. In that regard, the ownership has already been transferred to me. While saying this, I showed the skeptical Eric the property registry. Here is the property registry. It shows who the owner is. Eric hastily grabbed the document and scrutinized it. Then his expression gradually turned to confusion. Wait a minute. I don't understand. It really is in your name. What happened? You didn't forge the documents, did you? There's no need for such suspicion. I would never commit a crime. Why is the property in your name? Would my father really transfer it to you? Seeing Eric's agitation, I nodded in agreement. As he said, Colin had officially transferred the house to me. Why would he do that for someone like you? Why? Isn't it obvious? Because you are unfaithful, treat your wife as worthless, and cheat. I placed a bulging brown envelope on the table in addition to the previous documents. Inside the envelope were numerous photos of Eric and Carrie holding hands intimately and entering a hotel together. I have had doubts about the relationship between you and Carrie for a long time. Your recent closeness seemed odd, so I hired an investigator. The fact that I could gather so much evidence in just a week was probably because Eric had been far too careless. He never suspected my plan, looking down on me as just a convenient housekeeper, which backfired on him. That can't be. Hiring a detective agency isn't cheap. You shouldn't have the money for that. I've been cutting down on living expenses to prevent fraud. Eric accidentally blurted out more than he intended. Indeed, Eric had kept his income a secret. The living expenses he provided were barely enough to cover our food. If used for household expenses, there would be almost nothing left for personal use. I don't recall buying anything for myself other than consumables after we got married. Meanwhile, he would stay out all night and squander money at nightclubs. I hadn't realized he was intentionally limiting the household budget, but it seemed that was the case. You really can only maintain yourself by belittling others. You probably thought I wouldn't hire anyone because of the lack of money. Who put you up to this? Who taught you such tactics? In anger, he tore up the evidence photos, but I had already backed them up. While watching his futile resistance, I continued the conversation. It was your father, Colin. If it weren't for him, I might have been crying and thrown out of the house by now. While Eric was away, I continued to battle loneliness. Many people sent me birthday wishes, but the hollow feeling in my heart remained unfilled. Engulfed in tears day and night, I hadn't noticed the sound at the entrance. Why are you crying on your birthday, Olivia? Eric is away, and the room seems dark. It was Colin who appeared, saying this. He had planned a surprise for me and entered the house quietly using his spare key. He placed a shopping bag filled with flashy decorations on the table and cared for me like a real father. Colin remembered my birthday when you completely neglected it, and he listened to me about your behavior. I told him everything about how I was being treated by you. Colin was furious as if it were his own matter and offered to cover the expenses for hiring a detective agency. Because of his support, I was able to request an investigation. To resort to such underhanded methods to tattle. If you disliked it, you should have come back earlier. I've heard that the business trip wasn't really for 2 months. Eric and Carrie were shaken by these words. Although Colin, the president, had ordered the business trip, it turned out that it was actually scheduled for only 1 month. I knew this month was your birthday, Olivia's, so I planned to make sure Eric could be with her on that day. Colin shook his head, puzzled that Eric had not yet returned. A few days earlier, I had received word that he had returned from his business trip and was attending work as usual. If he hasn't returned home yet, where could he be? Perhaps lying to be with another woman. Immediately, I suspected infidelity, and Carrie's face came to mind. As I had guessed, Eric had been happily spending time at her place for about a month. The evidence photos I submitted included images of them leaving Carrie's house. A spiteful and unattractive woman resorts to despicable actions. Without youth or beauty, you must manipulate others to survive, I suppose. Eric's veins bulged with anger, and Carrie also showed her indignation. They accused me of invasion of privacy, claiming it was illegal to take photos of their home. It's unfortunate that you feel used and discarded, but this reaction is excessive. I could sue you, you know. We are prepared for that. If you want to sue, go ahead. If you still feel like fighting in this situation, then good luck in court. Carrie was taken aback, lost for words, and hid behind Eric, pulling on his arm. Eric, do something. This ordinary woman is ruining my happiness. Don't panic. After all, she's an outsider. My father is a kind person, and if we explain the truth, he will surely support us. Moreover, my mother is also backing our marriage. Ignoring me, Eric quickly took out his phone. He was probably trying to call Colin. Too bad for you. Your tears might have influenced my father, but my words hold more weight, as I hold a significant position in the company. Just watch silently as my father takes my side. Eric quickly dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. At that moment, a ringtone came from the room behind us. Hearing the tune, Eric's complexion changed. Isn't that my father's ringtone? Without waiting for my reply, the door to the back room swung open forcefully. From that door emerged a figure who looked sternly at Eric and sighed. I'm really disappointed. I was hoping the evidence photos were false. Wait, what's going on? Why is my father here? I invited him. I intended to have an important discussion with you once you returned. The plan was to settle matters of infidelity and divorce today. More importantly, I had asked Colin to secretly observe to better understand Eric's daily actions. I was prepared, but I didn't expect such impudence. How will you explain this? And I can't believe that Sharon would defend her son's infidelity. Eric's confidence vanished, and he became as meek as a frightened child in front of his father. The mother-in-law appeared tense as well. Wait. Olivia is only saying things that suit her. She just spaces out at home, and it's getting worse. Her housekeeping is so sloppy, it makes me not want to come home. If anyone had a husband like that, they would be stressed and exhausted. I never felt that the housekeeping was sloppy. On the contrary, it's always been meticulously done, and I'm quite impressed. I've never heard Eric express gratitude for the housekeeping. I've always been treated as if it was just expected of me, so Colin's kind words really touched me. I've been enduring it all this time. I thought I was working hard for our future. And you won't even apologize now. What? Why should I apologize? This whole situation is your fault. Our home has been taken over. Olivia is the one who should be apologizing. Eric's anger intensified when he felt cornered. Frightened, I naturally moved closer to Colin. I'm going to be the future president. I'm destined for an important position. A woman like you, who fusses over trivial matters, is nothing but a nuisance. How can you say that? We once loved each other. How can you say such horrible things? Loved. Don't make me laugh. Eric coldly laughed while pulling Carrie closer to show off. I don't remember ever loving someone like you. I just thought flattering you would be useful. You're nothing more than an unpaid housekeeper. Despite knowing it was a poor excuse, Eric gave a bitter smile. Unaware of this, Carrie believed she was genuinely doing well and smiled broadly. It's over. I'll give you this house and everything in it. Such a small house. I can easily acquire more if I work seriously. As the future president, I deserve a wealthier life. What are you talking about? There's no way you can become the future president. As Eric blustered, Colin sighed deeply and said that. I knew that Colin was already considering firing Eric. Despite this, as a parent, Colin told me that if Eric showed any remorse, there might be some room for leniency. However, given the current situation, that seemed unlikely. Colin shook his head with a weary voice. Eric, this is the end for you. You no longer need to come to the company. The same goes for Carrie. The turmoil you two have caused within the company and the pain you've brought to our home, it's unbearable. And Sharon, I can't take it anymore. We need to consider a divorce. A large hand soothingly stroked my back. I felt a genuine warmth from Colin's kindness. Damn it, do what you want. I will live for true love with Carrie. I want nothing to do with any of you anymore. As the two tried to leave, I quickly stopped them. There was still an important issue that needed to be resolved. Wait, I will claim division of property through a lawyer. Don't try to escape. And Carrie, this applies to you too. Huh? I don't have any money. I can't pay. I don't care. You must find a way to pay. What you've done deserves it. When I glared at her sternly, Carrie was silent for a moment before muttering in a low voice. This is the worst. If I knew it would end like this, I never would have gotten involved with Eric. Eric argued back at her. Why would you say that? If there's love, none of this should be a problem. He retorted, to which she continued. With that love, will you earn it for me? I don't need a man who has no money. Revealing her true intentions were focused on financial value. Eric was left behind, meekly following the younger woman he had claimed to love. Was that truly the love he sought? I couldn't imagine such a relationship lasting long. Are you okay? You seem very tired. You should rest, Colin said with concern. Thank you. I'm really sorry for having you take on such an unpleasant role, and considering what's happening with your wife, I truly feel sorry, I replied, filled with remorse. Colin, while stroking his chin thoughtfully, shifted his gaze to me and said, It's reassuring to know you rely on me, but I'm also contemplating what to do about the successor issue. How are your job prospects looking, Olivia? He asked. I haven't decided on anything concrete yet. I plan to start looking for a job once things settle down a bit, I responded. In that case, how about working here again? We're short-handed since 2 employees have left, Colin suggested. I was surprised by his unexpected proposal, but Colin nodded with a warm smile, making me feel truly appreciated. A person of your integrity would be highly valued anywhere. Think of this as a kind of scouting. What do you think? He asked, and I nodded repeatedly, my eyes welling up with tears. Being rejected so many times by Eric had been painful. Even after I had stood up to him, I hadn't found the energy to take the next step forward. However, knowing that someone valued my efforts made me eager to respond with all my energy. I'm still inexperienced, but I look forward to working with you, I answered with renewed resolve. After overcoming many hardships, I was ready to step through a new door in my life. 6 months later, I returned to the workplace as Colin's secretary. The knowledge from the secretarial studies I had undertaken, thinking it might be useful when Eric was appointed president, proved to be very beneficial now. My salary had increased, and both my work and personal life were more fulfilling than ever. One day during lunchtime, I received an unexpected call from a familiar number. "Eric? Why are you calling now?" I answered, surprised. I hadn't seen Eric since our emotional and harsh breakup. The divorce had already been finalized, and I had claimed $50,000 in property division from him. His current lifestyle and how much he struggled with monthly payments were no longer my concern. So, when the call came out of the blue, I felt a bit perplexed to hear his voice. After trying to ignore the call a few times, the persistent ringing of my smartphone eventually got to me, and I answered. "I'm actually on a break at work right now, but what do you need?" I asked in a somewhat exasperated tone. "You finally picked up. Help me, Olivia." On the other end of the phone, Eric's voice trembled, as if he was frightened by something. I maintained my composure to try to halt his disheveled story temporarily. "I don't understand what's happened, but why should I help you? Aren't you supposed to be with your beautiful and wonderful wife, confirming your true love?" I questioned. "There is no such thing as true love." Carrie was really the worst. Eric's voice was a mix of regret and anger. He began to divulge what had happened since our divorce. After losing all his assets, Eric was living in a small apartment with Carrie. Despite his wounded pride, he worked multiple part-time jobs to support their living. But his efforts were in vain, as Carrie completely trampled over him. She was seeing several other men and now wants to leave me because I am poor. Eric explained in a pained voice. Carrie's attraction to him had been not for his personality, but for his anticipated position as the future president. Once he lost that position, he also lost his value to Carrie, and she promptly abandoned him. Despite having gone into debt to buy Carrie a car, she had disappeared with it. Now, he was being chased by debt collectors, living his absolute worst days, as Eric confided. His voice was laden with clear despair, and even over the phone, his dejection was palpable. "Isn't this situation something that didn't just start now? Have you really been completely unaware up until now?" I asked. Confused, he replied. "What do you mean? Did you know something about Carrie's affairs?" While I hesitated to confuse him further, I had known about some of her actions from when I had his behavior investigated. The detective had recorded other men visiting her house during that investigation. In fact, I had never shown Eric the evidence of photos of these visits. I had only shown him evidence of his own dishonesty. Since it wasn't the information I needed, I didn't particularly care about it. I explained calmly. "If you had told me that information from the beginning, I wouldn't have ended up in this situation." Eric said angrily, but then took a deep breath and suddenly changed to a gentler tone. "Actually, I really need a wise woman like you, Olivia. You must have been lonely too, right? Why don't we start over?" he suggested. His sweet words sent a chill down my spine. Unfortunately, my life, both work and personal, is quite fulfilling now. Honestly, even if I had the time, starting a new relationship with you again would be impossible, I firmly stated. Desperate, he pleaded. Then, could you at least lend me some money? If the debt collectors find me, I can't even begin to imagine what terrible things might happen. Despite his plea, I coldly ended the call in the middle and added his number to the blocked list. What happens to Eric from here on is no longer my concern. Considering the difficult situation Carrie will likely face, I can only think that she brought this upon herself. Carrie always seems to be good at catching disreputable men, I muttered to myself unintentionally. According to the investigation report on her affairs, her lovers were uniformly a group of no-goods, all saddled with debt. Among them, Eric was just a small fry. I will never choose such a path. I will live my life seriously and diligently. I also want to show my gratitude to Colin properly. I vowed to myself. That was the last time I heard from Eric. A few days later, I received a call from the lawyer informing me that Eric had paid the property division in full. Surprisingly, the funds he used came from a shady lender, and due to this, he was being forced into harsh labor to repay his debt. He was working long hours from morning till late at night and juggling multiple part-time jobs to support himself, and this grueling lifestyle was taking a toll on his health. Just imagining his prematurely aged appearance was heartbreaking. According to what I heard, he still lives nearby, but he has changed so much that even if I saw him on the street by chance, I probably wouldn't recognize him. As for Carrie, her situation hasn't changed. She is still struggling to pay off her debts. Just as I had anticipated, she was deceived by her former lovers and now has no choice but to work in the nightlife industry. Carrie used to play a game of ensnaring men and then abandoning them, but now she is being exploited by another man and works nightly to meet his demands. Once young and attractive, she now suffers from sleep deprivation, which has diminished her beauty. Her skin has become rough, and frequent drinking has made her voice hoarse. I can't help but feel pity for her drastic transformation. Seeing how far she has fallen and her miserable state, it pains me to see how much a person can change. On Colin's side, after his divorce from Sharon was finalized, she has been living a modest yet lonely life. As for myself, I continue to work as Colin's secretary and am by his side. He has started to discuss the future of the business and the possibility of considering a successor soon. Someone trustworthy like you, Olivia, could confidently be entrusted with this company. Colin often says, to which I reply, I am flattered by your words, but I am still a novice and would like to continue learning a lot from you, Colin. While I may still lack experience and knowledge, I strongly aspire to one day confidently take over this company and further develop the achievements Colin has built, becoming a commendable business leader. I believe this is the greatest way I can express my gratitude to Colin.